And you're good to go.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call the June 10th regular meeting of the Financial Advisory Commission to order. And I see we have with us Frank Brown, Bob Burden, Jim Cardillo, and me as quorum of the Financial Advisory Commission. We also have with us Jackie Giles, Deputy City Manager for Resilience and Sustainability, Jody Dickinson, Finance Director, Ross Arnett, Councilman and Chair of the Council Finance Committee, and Kim Vronsky, staff from the Finance Department. And it looks like that's it. I have not heard from the other commission members to see whether or not they will be here. They did not advise me that they are not going to be here. So they may show up. If they do, we'll try and bring them up to date as to where we are in the meeting. In any event, welcome everybody. And I sent out an agenda along with meeting materials. You all had an opportunity to review the agenda.
Yes.
If you have any
Yes.
revisions or correction to the suggested agenda, hearing none, entertain a motion to accept and approve the agenda as presented by Bob Burden, seconded by
So
Jim
moved, Frank.
Jim Cardillo. And any discussion on the motion?
No.
Hearing none, all in favor of accepting the motion, signify by saying aye.
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 1, 2, 3. Motion carries. Next, I sent out 3 sets of minutes, and Kim, thank you very much for the comprehensive minutes. They are the April 29th special meeting, May 6th special meeting, and May 13th regular meeting of the commission. Unless any commission members have an objection, I'd like to take these collectively. Are there any? I'll entertain a motion first to approve the minutes of April 29, May 6, and May 13 meetings of the Financial Advisory Commission. Motion made by Bob Burden, seconded by Frank Brown. Any discussions, revisions, or correction to the draft minutes? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye for approval.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Ayes have it. Motion is approved. Come down to reports. First, Jody, anything to report on general operations of the Finance Department?
Let's see. No, I think we're going to talk about the budget in just a minute.
Yeah.
The only thing I want to report is, as you know, I had hired and we had started the onboarding process for a new assistant director. And on Tuesday, he emailed me to tell me that he's got another job. So he is not, after agreeing to delay the start date until his current job ends. And anyway.
Okay, sorry to hear that, Jody.
Yeah,
And
so
yeah, for the record, I'd like to note that Faye Curry has joined us and Ed Meehan has joined us, along with Lynn Farrow. So, anything else, Jody, about general operations of the Finance Department and finance operation?
No, I don't have anything else to report. My focus has been primarily on budget for the last few weeks. So other than that, we're just rolling along as normal, trying to, there's the couple things on the, in the accounting side, we're trying to get ACH capability on our AP system so that we can ACH payments instead of checks. And we're working towards that. And I think that is within sight within just a few weeks. So we should be, that should give us some efficiencies there. So that'll be a.
Okay, Jody, I'd like to hold up on the budget report just for a couple minutes, because that may be a little bit longer than a lot of the other issues. So I'll come back to you shortly. Jim Cardillo, anything from the audit committee?
The audit committee did not meet in May. The May meeting was suspended, but I did want to reiterate something that was in our May 13 minutes with regards to the presentation from Forest Consulting and the implementation of budget performance measures for city departments. This is a major undertaking for the city that will have long-lasting benefits to the city's financial management. And it really does create an additional layer of authority and responsibility for department heads on managing their departments. So they are measured not only on their financial measures, but the performance measures that they set out to define at the beginning of a period and then monitor. So it's a major undertaking. The work by Forest Consulting to develop these performance measures, and then the transition to the city manager, to the deputy city manager to monitor this on an ongoing basis is a major undertaking that was first requested via the audit committee and has now been implemented. So just to reiterate something I mentioned last month.
Thank you very much, Jim. Anybody have any questions for Jim? Lynn Farrow.
I just wanted to add to Jim's analysis that yes, the audit committee and the audit committee will receive a presentation from Forest Consulting on how to analyze the performance measures, how to look at them, and how to help the departments, and how we'll all help the departments budget and have continuous improvement based on those performance measures. And just a note of clarification, it's the assistant city manager that will be managing the process. So thank you.
Thank you for clarification.
Okay.
Yes, I need to get better with the titles with regards to the assistant and
It's-
deputy city managers. And
It's all confusing, but yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. I appreciate your comment.
You're welcome.
Okay. Bob Burden, anything from the spending affordability subcommittee?
We're going to be working during the summertime to gather the information for a report to the Financial Advisory Commission towards the end of the summer. You have the 23 counties and the additional municipalities that exist in the state of Maryland. We've identified roughly about 6 that do have some type of spending affordability or budget advisory type capacity, if you will. Howard County, Prince George's County, Queen Anne's County, Baltimore County, Harford County, and Montgomery County. We did email those over to the city manager, to David Jarrell, and he came back with his recommendation that they seem to be all good areas to be able to tap into to learn what they're doing and how they put it together and the successes that they've had with it. Actually, interesting enough, I thought Baltimore City would have a financial advisory board or some type of budget advisory type function, but Baltimore City doesn't, believe it or not. But anyhow, we'll be looking at those 6 counties and then at that point, pull that information together and get it back in the form of a report to the Financial Advisory Commission. So, yes.
Thank you to Bob and Ed for your work on that. Ross, you had a question or comment?
Could you run through those counties a little more slowly? I got Howard, Prince George's, Prince Anne, Montgomery.
Okay, let me go through them again. Howard County, Prince George's County, Queen Anne's County, Baltimore County, Harford County, Montgomery County.
Thank you.
Okay, now the names that these different counties use for this function may vary. Some call them a financial advisory board. Others call them a budget advisory board. Those seem to be the 2 dominant type of titles that go along with them. Those will be the areas that we'll be looking at.
Bob. Yeah.
By the way, I forgot to add Anne Arundel County. That's our, it's a home county that the city is part of, but add Anne Arundel County to that as well.
Okay, Bob, thank you very, very much. Really appreciate your work on that. Moving along, I sent you all by email the monthly boards and commissions email update from Hillary. Any questions about that? I would just note that she points out that the City Charter Review Commission is hard at work and encourages any individual, residents, or board or commission that has any suggestions or input for the Charter Revision Commission to make that known. If any member of our commission feels that there is any input this group should make to the Charter Review Commission, please feel free to formulate that and let me know. Any questions about Hillary's report? No, thank you. Now I'd like to come back to the budget. And Jody, I'd like you to tell us what happened that we may not have read about in the paper that we did read about in the paper. And then Ross, I think we may have be looking for some follow-up or feedback from you, and may have some questions for you from the view of the council. Let me make this observation. I think that some of us were a little bit taken aback and surprised by the extent of proposed budget amendments, and particularly in a year that may be challenging, but looking forward to a year that may be even more challenging, that we kind of wondered whether there was restraint in the budget process, whether there wasn't restraint, whether all the budget amendments were necessary, or whether they were to meet political and constituent demands and needs. So in any event, I think those are some things that are working in the back of at least a few of commission members' minds, and maybe more than just a few of us. So with that, Jody, it's all yours.
Yeah, well, so we, as a group, you reviewed the proposed budget that we submitted in April. And what I'll do now is just talk about the changes that took place during the amendment process. And other than that, I felt that the budget that we had proposed was not that impacted. I felt like it represents pretty much what we have. I mean, there were some funding added to study some special issues and a couple of new projects that went into the capital budget. But other than that, I felt like that it's pretty much in the same form that we had before. And so you may have questions about some of the amendments, and I'll just run through these one at a time and tell you what they were trying to do.
Jody, when you do that, one thing that I was wondering about is where the money coming from to fund these amendments, where there enhanced expenditure. In particular, I read somebody acknowledge that even with or without, there's still a structural deficit. So be that as it may, go ahead. I apologize for the interruption.
Right. So the structural deficit is the same that it was before. When we're talking about structural deficit, we have ourselves covered for 22, but we're using some one-time federal monies to help us get through until our revenues return to their previous levels. And we hope not to use those federal sources all in 22, but have some in 23 to carry us through until, like I say, the revenues recover and we're back to our normal activities. So other than that, the new initiatives we're using from our reserve for one-time uses, which is our excess fund balance reserve that's created at the end of every fiscal year when we exceed, when we do better in our budget activity than we thought we had planned to when we set the budget. So when we came to the council, we came with a few amendments that was sponsored by the administration, mainly because things that we didn't do correctly in the budget initially that we needed to fix. One was we moved some money from DPW to planning and zoning and that was because we had a position in DPW engineering that they had decided they weren't going to fill. It's a traffic engineer. They've tried to fill it several times and they can't find anybody to fill the role. So they had decided not to keep it in the budget, but we did not take that there was miscommunication there. We had left it in. So we had that funding there and we realized that we didn't need it there. But on the planning and zoning side, during the recent lawsuit, one of the commitments we made in the decree was that we would appoint somebody in planning and zoning to be a HACA liaison to help work with HACA and identify some of these issues that they face. And planning and zoning really doesn't have a person there to do that. If they tried to, they could appoint somebody who's already there, but I think that would be a burden on them. They're already a very heavily burdened department. So they wanted to create a liaison position. So we moved some funding over from this DPW position to fund that HACA liaison position. So they'll be working to fill that beginning July 1. We also came forward with an amendment to add some money. And so that was just, you wanted to know about the sources. That was just a movement from one department to another. The second amendment, we took some reserve for one-time uses and put them in the capital outlay funding for MIT. There were some additional capital outlay needs they had that we had not included in the budget. And we felt that was critical enough to fund that. So that was from the reserve from one-time funds. Now, whether or not that's the only thing that it may be, MIT does capital outlay every year. They have capital outlay needs. Some are continuing needs that they continue to do replacement, and some of the needs are one-time needs. But to the extent that the 65,000 that we added is a recurring need, that also adds to the continuing expenses that have to be funded with this reserve for one-time uses. That's the only potential impact on the structural deficit that we had in this amendment process. The third amendment, we had some extra CDBG money awarded for a particular project on HACA, Robinwood. They're doing some air conditioning replacement there, and the final award was given, and it's a $4,400 higher. So we added to that grant money. And so that was the source of that was the grant fund. The grant money's coming in from CDBG. We added some funding to the maintenance facility capital project. They're scheduled to break ground in the fall. They've had some cost increases there. And I'd have to have somebody from Public Works explain specifically what it was that added to the cost. So we've added $420,000 to that project. And that source is bonds. So we added to the bonds there. And then the next three amendments came from the Finance Committee discussions and were sponsored by the Finance Committee. The first one moved some money around among the community grants. They shifted, I think it was $5,000 from one grantee to another. And so that was passed by council. Amendment, the next one set up $5,000 in cost using the reserve for one-time uses to pay the administrative cost of a task force. And this task force is going to be established to study and discuss potential merging of services with the county. And there was a lot of discussion about which services to merge. Should we focus on transportation? Should we make it more general? Should it be public safety focused? This $5,000 is simply to pay any administrative costs that the task force needs to incur when doing their work. So that should be forming soon. I don't know.
Jody, hold on. Jim, did you have a question?
Thanks. With regards to the task force, who determines who sits on the task force? I'm just curious.
That, I don't even think that's been established yet.
Understood.
I don't know if Lynn has
think
any idea
Alderman Arnett is muted.
who he's gonna do it. It's just that we got the funding first, and now the formation of the task force is gonna be the next.
Thank you.
The finance committee will determine.
That's funny. It will be
Well-
determined through the legislation will identify who determines the members. So, but I love Alderman Arnett's suggestion there. That's great. We'll just put it all on the finance committee. They can staff the task force and the whole bit. It'd be great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
there was some talk about that. Of course, it's going to have to involve people from the county perspective as well. We won't know if it's a feasible, if anything's feasible without including them in the discussion. So I'm sure there'll be representatives from the county there too. So the next thing that we added was, again, we set up $50,000 from the reserve for one-time uses. The finance committee is very interested in doing an extensive survey of the residents to find out what their priorities are. And I think they envision hiring a firm to do this, somebody to develop the question specifically and make sure we target all populations and not just the ones that are vocal, that we get input from all. On the next, we added a project for the Taylor Avenue. The source in FY22 is developer contributions. Right there on Taylor Avenue where the police station comes out, and there's a new hotel going in back over there. And both that hotel and the Park Place are interested in creating a traffic circle there, because that's a difficult place to turn left out of because of the elevation of the road. There's a hill there and there's a turn, and it's very difficult to get out there. So one of the developers has offered funding to help design the project. And we added some funding in one of the out years in the CIP, which right now is designated as bonds, but there's hope that the developers will also help construct that project, but they cannot commit to that at this time. So we put it in as bonds as a worst case scenario. And I think that was like $1.3 million. And the next amendment added $25,000 funding to planning and zoning so that they could have a consultant review their processes and their regulations. This was sponsored by Alderwoman Tierney. She believes that they could improve and streamline some of their processes. And she wanted to have some outside firms study that to help them find efficiencies and ways to speed up the developer projects. All right, so we won't talk about the ones that didn't pass. I'll just tell you what did pass. The next one was the addition of a project for Wells Cove. It's enough for a feasibility study about adding water access in Wells Cove, some kind of dock structure. There's some issues there with some infrastructure that's already there at Wells Cove that we have to work around. And we put $52,500 in the budget. And that was bonds. We used $17,000 of the reserve for one-time uses and increased Rec and Parks budget so that next spring, before the flowers are purchased for Main Street, that we're going to purchase self-watering planters. So that we can save money on the watering process. Right now, the baskets just drain and we pretty much have to water them at least every other day in the hot weather. And we're hoping to cut that back with these new planters. And all right, so this one did. Now I'm looking at the amendments and I don't have which passed. The conversion of an administrative office associate in planning and zoning from contract to civil service. And they transferred some money from DPW's budget over to fund that. And there was some question from DPW as to whether or not they could actually afford to lose that funding, but we're going to have to pay more closely attention to that and try to find extra funding for them if their street light electricity costs are higher than what they have in the budget. That was $22,000 to change that position over. That is
Let me
a
ask you,
position-
Jody, let me ask you a question. Is that a position that has been operating or functioning for a long time, or is it something that has just begun within the last year or two?
No, so this person, well, I'll talk about it from the position perspective. This is a part-time contractual position that currently helps with boards and commissions and does a lot of nighttime work. It would be what Kim does for you here. Some of the boards and commissions are using this part-time person hourly rate to, take the minutes and help schedule the meetings and that kind of thing. But it's, for instance, she does the planning commission, which they meet a lot. Their meetings are long. They're very involved. And it's a lot of hours. And in addition, planning and zoning has been trying to get, for the last couple of years, an extra administrative position. And they're hoping by using this person full-time, she can, and using her as a full-time position, they can use her for some of their administrative needs. In addition, she can help with administrative needs of the CDBG programs. Teresa Wellman, who directs those funds, has funding in her CDBG budget for administrative costs, and we can use some of that to cover the cost for this position. But the net impact, the net increase in the cost for general funds for converting this was $22,000, and that money was taken from DPW, from the streetlight account. And
Jody, is that going to be a net increase in cost when you take into account cut salary, benefits, and everything else?
yeah, so I don't have the whole net impact in front of me, but the net impact to the general fund of converting it is $22,000. So that $22,000 reflects the fact that CDBG is going to pick up some of those administrative costs. So that's already been taken off. The net increase for converting, which includes pension and all the health benefits, is going to be $22,000. But we transferred that from another department. So right now there's been no impact overall.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and the next one was an amendment converting the planned, well, I think we have somebody now filling that position, but converting the Office of Community Services Administrative Assistant from part-time to full-time. That did not require any new funds. We had hired the social worker at an amount that was lower than what we had in the budget for that position. And we had enough excess from there to make this part-time position a full-time position, but it's contractual for right now. So there's no pension tied to that position.
Okay.
Okay, so, and the only other changes we had was on the resolution for some of the fines. Alderwoman Tierney increased some of the fines for 4 or 5 different fines that she felt needed to be more punitive in nature, and that was also passed. So hopefully I'll wait for your questions on these. That's a lot, and Alderman Arnett may want to speak to some of the changes too.
Let me let Alderman Arnett comment briefly, and then we'll take questions and comments from the commission members.
Briefly, do you know Alderman Arnett at all?
That's why I said briefly, Alderman Arnett. No, go ahead.
Well, I do have two issues that I want to bring to the fact's attention. I think they're specific to the fact, but I want to start out by saying this was by far, for me, the best budget process we've had, and for a number of reasons. First of all, I think the city manager, the city staff, the finance director really did exercise a lot of restraint in trying to hold down spending. Some spending you can't avoid because it's locked into salaries and benefits and union agreements and those sorts of things, and that's the vast majority of the budget. But I do think that very legitimate bona fide efforts were made to keep spending down. So while I do have some concerns about the ultimate outcome of the budget, and I did abstain rather than vote against it or vote for it. I think it was a very good process. I want to note that we had OpenGov available to us for line item detail, and many of us used it. It ultimately didn't get employed. I know Alderman Payon was going to try to make a motion to go to a constant yield budget and was going to come up with $750,000 worth of cuts by going into the details. The reality is, when you look at the details of the line item budget, there is not a lot of fat there. I mean, it's the kinds of things you need to have in the budget, like copiers and lights and those sorts of things to provide for the staff and allow them to do their jobs. So I think when we get to a point, if we ever get to a point where we need to be doing reductions in the size of the budget, it can't be at that microscopic level. It is really going to have to be decisions to get rid of city functions not that we just can't afford to do. And that's going to be quite an interesting debate. So the budget was legal, it was balanced, it was restrained, and it was largely dictated by the terms of
Oh, we lost them.
Ross, you're frozen. I don't know if you're gonna have to reconnect.
Yeah, I don't know if he can hear us. All right, well, while we're waiting for Ross to, for Alderman Arnett to get unfrozen, any members of the FAC have any comments or questions? Bob Burden.
Yeah, Jody, you mentioned when you were going through the amendments that there was a capital outlay for for the MIT of about $65,000, which apparently seemed to be recurrent needs each year.
I don't know to what extent it's recurrent. Some of it might be recurrent. They just ask for an annual budget to do some replacements. And what happened in the budget process when we were asking them about what they needed, they were asked to identify the places they could reduce. And in those discussions, they were trying to find some reductions. And when we were communicating about those reductions, we apparently reduced it too far. There was some miscommunication about what they needed.
Okay.
And so they were trying to find savings for us because we asked them to find savings in their non-personal services items. And the amount that we put in, they said they couldn't function with that amount. And they wanted about 65,000 more. Now, some of, they have the 65,000 and they are on a repetitive replacement cycle. Not all of that they may be able to save some of that if they can push off some of those replacements, but some of that 65,000 may in fact be more repetitive type capital outlay replacements. They are flexible, but regular expenses. And if we had known that during the budget process, we may have tried to scrub something else out of the budget somewhere else or increase a turnover allocation or something for one of the departments. But This came to us, near the end, and so we just said it's a capital outlay item. We'll use the reserve for one-time uses, and then if they have this funding, and if we have excess funding from somewhere else, we might be able to not have to use the reserve. Is what we're hoping, but.
Okay, so basically.
It's not that
just-
big. It's not that big of a number. And if we had put that amount into our first budget, we just would have had more ARPA fundings allocated to cover us for next year. So that's how it would have been. It would have either been the reserve for one-time uses or ARPA, which both cases are one-time sources. So.
Okay, so it's just generally a miscommunication that occurred in the budgetary
Yeah.
process.
We
and,
thought
so
they
it
told
wasn't
us we
something
could cut
that
it.
was-
When we looked at recommended cuts, we went back and forth about what they could afford to go with, and at the end, they said it wasn't the right number, so.
Okay,
So you had noted earlier in your comments that these amendments that took place really materially did not impact the budget to any great extent.
And I feel that except for this MIT item, the items are all appropriate uses for the reserve for one-time uses. That's
Okay.
excess fund balance. It's only a one-time thing, something we're gonna do once and it shouldn't repeat,
Mhm.
so.
Well, as soon as we get Ross back, it'd be interesting to hear his further comments. I think that certainly in reading about what was anticipated coming into Monday night, there were some concerns with the number of amendments that were being proposed last minute and the size of, the financial commitments that would have to be made if those amendments passed. I mean,
So, so
some of these issues should have been discussed way earlier in the budgetary process, i.e. like the constant yield and, the type of expense, cuts that would have been required if the constant yield was adopted and stuff like that, rather than wait to the last minute for some of this stuff to come up. I can imagine it probably gave you and David some heartburn there when you saw some of this stuff, but
yeah, so we had a lot of amendments that came through. Like we had other aldermen that wanted to submit amendments, but there was a deadline that had been established by a resolution, and these amendments did not come through by the deadline time, and the council decided not to consider new amendments on the floor. But those amendments would have increased the list. There were, I read to you, I think we had 19 original amendments that came up by the deadline, and this would have almost doubled that number. And a lot of different types of programs, a lot of them using from the one-time reserve use and some of them making cuts from other departments. And we would have had a bit of studying to do on those cuts because they were hitting departments, larger departments with larger line items and moving their money around for different purposes. So I wouldn't have, we would have had some debate on those additional amendments. So that would have made the night go a lot longer. We probably would have been there through to the next morning if we had to talk about all of those. But I was glad, I was happy with the way that finally resolved itself. And I'll just tell you that we have a reserve for one-time use of $3.9 million. And in the administration's budget, we had proposed using 700,000 of that, which brought it down to 3,274,000. And these extra things that did get passed bring it down to about $3 million. So it's not that big of a number. We still have a $3 million reserve for one-time uses. Okay, so go ahead and if you have any more specific questions.
Yeah, well, I see Ross is back, so we could probably let him finish his comments and then have some questions for him, if that's okay with you, Fred.
No, that's fine. That's fine. He has a taste of what the yank is if he goes on too long. But
I know.
go ahead, Ross.
I didn't know, Fred, I didn't know you had that much control over my internet, but
Well, it tells us why it's important to have MIT fully up to date and modern and So
Exactly.
good, worthwhile expenditure. Ross, go ahead.
The two fact issues that I'd like to bring to your attention are the one-time only fund. I discovered that that was done by resolution, and that's not an appropriate way to legislate that. But more importantly, we don't really have a definition of what is a one-time only expenditure and what is not. And that is growing to be a fairly large fund. It's one of the reasons why it's hard to be too terribly upset about our budget, because we have so many fairly large reserve funds here and there. If we ever got back to a situation like we were in 2009, 2010, there are pockets to go to before we take out $10 million lines of credit. So that's an issue, and I'm going to be working on legislation on that with, and we may do it by resolution rather than by code. That's something I need to work out with Jody and with Mike Lyles. The other thing, though, was this whole issue of constant yield, which has got to be sorted out. Alderman Payon wanted to go to constant yield with his cuts. I don't think anybody truly understands what the constant yield legislation from the state is. It is simply telling you that if you keep the same tax revenue as you had in the previous year, here's how you'd have to change your tax rate. And since our assessed value is going up, it usually means lowering the tax rate. But I did an exercise where I went back to when I moved here in 2002, and I took the amount of property tax yield we had in that year, which was $18,047,000, and I aged it forward using the compound growth rates to see what, if we had held constant yield, what, or if we didn't do constant yield, we just aged that forward by a simple thing, and it was a 2.5% growth thing. And it turns out that our taxes would be 10 million more than what we're currently taxing. And that, Bob, is why I think the spending affordability model work is going to be so important. I and others have assumed that the city may be overspending and that we're not necessarily being good stewards. But if you do a simple exercise like that to show what the tax rate could be, it could be higher and with a very reasonable compound growth rate. So I'm kind of revising my thinking and having a more open mind on things. It's not clear to me that we're overtaxed, and certainly not for the wide breadth of services that we provide. Bill Kardash did his editorial in the paper and compared us to Rockville and Gaithersburg. They're not full service cities. They're not even close to it. So we have to have fair comparisons, and we really need to be astute in how we do this analysis. So before I get zapped again, I just wanted to put those two on the table for your consideration. I think they're two very important issues and that we need to look at them. I would value your taking a look at those two things.
Thanks, Ross. Jody, question on the constant yield. My understanding, and I may be wrong, is that a jurisdiction that chose to lower the tax rate to maintain the constant yield would be in jeopardy of losing some of these federal funds that have been doled out. They can't be used for a tax reduction or to fund a tax reduction.
Right.
So you may be referring to the ARPA monies, or I don't know if it's the CARES or the ARPA monies had a provision in there like that. So yes, and I did not remember that when they were proposing it and we were debating it in the work session. That would have been a useful thing to bring up. You can't use, if we're going to use some of those ARPA monies to cover revenue loss and then cut our property taxes, that would not be appropriate.
Yeah. Okay. I ran into this issue with one of my other the municipalities I work with. So, okay. Any other questions for Jody or Ross? Bob.
Yeah, Ross, coming back to the process that the city council had to address on Monday evening with a number of these amendments. It raised a concern, at least in my mind, as to the extent to which some of the aldermen and alderwomen really appreciate the challenges that lie ahead here for the city, particularly in the next fiscal year when you're going to have to work on the, I guess, the 23 budget. Some of these amendments seem to be at the extreme ends. I mean, you had at one end, a desire to cut the budget by $600,000, $700,000 to meet a balanced budget if you were to apply the constant yield, which, by the way, I agree with you. This would be something that, the fact, at least I would welcome us to be able to be engaged in that and have a discussion with the city council on. The second, of course, the other extreme is that you had another alderman or older people, that were advocating expenses that just didn't seem to, or expense commitments that, return on the investment just didn't seem to make sense. And I think that you addressed some of those in some of your comments on Monday evening, and certainly your vote to abstain probably reflected some of your concerns in that area. My question is there additional work that needs to be done among our city council members to help them better understand some of the challenges that are lying ahead here? I mean, granted, the budget, as well as being a financial document, is a political document, but nonetheless, there is a fiduciary responsibility here that certainly you get, but I'm concerned as to whether some of our other city council members really understand, the challenges that lie ahead, and whether that may not call for some type of, at some point this coming year, before you get into the next budget cycle, whether it may require some type of maybe mini retreat or something like that, where they get a full accounting and a full understanding of, exactly what is going to need to be addressed, and some of the decisions are going to be that will have to be made down the road.
So my response is that I've come to realize after almost 15 years, council really has very little power to do very much with the budget. It pretty much comes to us as a fait accompli, and it pretty much is a fait accompli once the union negotiations are struck, and as long as we tie all the other salaries and benefits to those that are negotiated in the union contract. So we have COLAs, we have very large step increases, something I think we need to look at, 5.6% step increases and promotions, and we continue to convert staff, which bring with them the benefit costs. Now, the conversions benefit costs, I think total was $32,000 for this year, Jody, if I remember it correctly. Not huge, and that's because we were largely converting lower cost staff. But I don't know that I've not found the crisis point other when Josh was facing bankruptcy. We're going to have carryover ARPA money. We're going to have the next increase in the tax, property tax, which will pretty much overcome, I think, the structural deficit we're facing, and maybe more than overcome. Jody can speak to this better than I, in fiscal 23. So I'm not even seeing where we're going to have any pressure to change business as usual in 23. I'm kind of depressed about that, because I had hoped pre-COVID that this 22's budget was going to be the forcing year. Nope, because we got all of the glut of federal funds, the one-time only monies. One-time only monies are carrying over, so that's going to ease the transition into 23. And that is the year when we're going to be renegotiating the contracts. So, if we don't have any pressure to change the budget, and quite frankly, other than a few people, we're not getting a lot of pressure from constituents. There's nobody showing up with red shirts or red signs saying you're killing us with taxes. And so I'm not sensing a huge level of dissatisfaction from constituents. Now, maybe it's because they've just become numb and they're not speaking to us. So that really leaves it to our own sense of fiscal responsibility as elected representatives. And that's a hard sell. Everybody has their own special areas. Dewan wants to do the guaranteed income project. Brooks and Dewan want to have all kinds of support for affordable housing. Those are all new programs, expensive programs. And otherwise, the budget just rolls along. And the city's staffing level and the city service levels are staying the same. I'm trying to find the pressure point. I thought this year I could have 4 of us that were really going to make a stink, but the one-time only money just overwhelmed it. Maybe next year, if some of us are back, and we might not all be back, there'll be a pressure point, but I'm just not seeing it. And again, that's why the spending affordability model, maybe we're doing the right thing. Maybe we're at the sweet spot. I'm skeptical of that, but I cannot give you empirical evidence that says something to the contrary. And without analysis, how do we make the case that we need to get rid of something? And what would it be? You get rid of transportation, you're getting rid of something that services people who don't have automobiles. You get rid of parks and recs, you're getting rid of something that a lot of people enjoy and are getting a pretty good deal on. What will you get rid of? Get rid of finance? Send finance to the county? Jody can go back home. I don't think anybody wants to give up that kind of autonomy, and certainly not police and fire. Even though I think the most important services we get are from public works, it's very hard to find something that you can get a strong 5-vote consensus that we got to stop doing this or we got to cut way back. So I'm not even sure that the council, particularly as we're currently constructed in our form of government, is ever going to be the right vehicle to bring that reconciliation. Am I depressing you? Because I can tell you I'm depressed.
Well,
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Ross, for your sobering comments. And we'll have to wait and see what happens and look forward to the report that Bob and Ed are going to give us. And time will tell as we go forward over the next year or two. Anything further on the budget?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, he asked about pressure points. The salaries, when we renegotiate those contracts, we cannot have 5.5% steps or 5.35 or whatever it is steps and 3% COLAs ongoing, because even normal revenue growth in our economy would not maintain pace with that. So we've got to change those structures in some way. That won't ultimately be my decision, but that's what the pressure point is going to be. Even if we got back to a normal revenue level, it does not grow year over year at that rate.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Good discussion.
Fred?
And
Hey,
yes,
Fred?
I'm
Fred,
sorry,
yeah.
Ed, I missed you.
No. Sorry. I was just waiting for the right time. So I would say that Alderman Arnett's comments are a little depressing to me. And so this is a little bit of, philosophical observation and, building to a question. So, what Bob and I are going to do and will hopefully be of some value to give us a sense of what the city can do. And so hopefully that work will inform this process going forward. But what it really sounds like everybody is saying here is that we can only make adjustments on the edges. And one essential question is going to be, should this be a full service city? And the issue of contract negotiations that, that Jody pointed out and what in her view, we need to confront, it makes me wonder the fundamental issue of where can this committee ultimately contribute? Because if we're just on the outer edges of isolated questions, And nobody is really addressing what are the city services we wish to retain and why, who's using which services, and are we getting, what can loosely be called a return on investment? And where does the will come from to take a longer term view in the contract negotiations? That's what I'm kind of getting at. Is I'm beginning to wonder how this commission can really help. It sounds like there's an awful lot of angst over, we can't really get to the heart of things. And so that's kind of my question, is how can this commission play a role that really helps to get to some of those fundamental issues? Because I will tell you personally, I don't know the contract negotiations that are going to come up. Well, who's going to make those decisions, and where does this commission fit? And are we in a position to be able to kind of give some voice to what Jody was saying? And so I realize this is more of a speech, but I'm kind of raising my hand for, these are kind of fundamental issues, and I'd like to see if there's a way that we could maybe take some of that political heat that the council would otherwise face, because we are an independent body and should be in a position to say, here are some views and here are some concerns, and maybe what we're doing on spending affordability can play right into that. But it does sound like we're coming up in the next year or two to be in a position to confront some fundamental issues. So I'm kind of raising the question of how much more can this commission do, urging us to take on more, but I just don't know what's feasible. So that's the discussion point, which I wanted to throw out there.
Okay, thank you, Ed.
I hope that's helpful and not just confounding to everyone.
Well, it's a good philosophical statement, and I think it's Bob, 1 second, and I think it needs to be said. In terms of who makes the decision about salaries and the negotiations, there'll be a negotiating team that ultimately the city council, because they're the ones who are going to have to cross the section and say no.
It comes to us, take it or leave it. We have no role whatsoever. At one point, 1 year, we did interest-based bargaining, Sheila and I, but really it's entirely the province of the city manager and an outside attorney. And whatever they negotiate, we can either say yes, which is what we always say, or no, go back and try it again. But we have no role in it. And it really does come to us fait accompli.
No, I understand that, Russ, but ultimately it's the city council that has to say yes or no. It may not have a choice. It's yes or no, it's Hobson's choice, but it's not the administration, it's not the city manager, it's not outside attorney who makes the final decision. That's a legislative and political decision. And I take it that your comments, your very astute comments, were for just get that on the table for further consideration as we go along.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. Because what I'm feeling is, maybe I'd say this is what I think I'm hearing, right? Is that, Jody's got her eye on the numbers, and she's pointing out some number issues that could create problems in the future. Alderman Arnett, is in a position where he will ultimately be voting up, down, or abstain. But I'm hearing, the limitations of his role. And so there may be a way for us as this independent commission to be able to have a more active voice to try to take a little heat off of some areas and provide some cover, so that if we come in and we say, look, hey, numbers from X to Y are completely reasonable, and maybe we tie it into the spending affordability and say, well, that's all perfectly fine. Well, then that may justify where things go. But if we can come in and say we're going down a path where we need to confront some things, and it's better to confront them sooner rather than later, that may help the discussion. So that's all I'm getting at. This is not something we're going to resolve today. I myself, there are some things that I would need to know to be able to try to give an informed input. But I guess I'm kind of arguing for the idea that I think our commission can play a very valuable role and get a little more into the thick of things. And if people are willing to do it, I certainly would be. So we can talk about it at future meetings if that makes sense to others.
Yep. I think the key here is we can talk until we're blue in the face. We can advise until we're blue in the face. That's our fault. We're an advisory body. But the recipient has to be willing and have the political courage to accept and act upon the sound advice that we are giving. So I just hope, we all don't get too frustrated, with the process and the lack of receptivity to our guidance. But that remains to be seen. For Bob and then Jody.
Yeah, thank you, Ed, for your comments and suggestions. I totally agree with what you're saying. I think the fact, certainly, can have a more dynamic role to play in terms of, taking some of the heat off the city council. I do want to note, though, we've been talking about the collective bargaining agreements. It's noted in the code that the Financial Advisory Commission does have a role to play in those collective bargaining agreements in terms of reviewing them before their execution. Now, Fred, I think you and I have been through several cycles on the fact when these collective bargaining agreements came up, and I'm not certain that the fact was given the opportunity fully to engage in that role, if you will. And I would certainly hope that giving the importance of these current collective bargaining agreements that are going to be coming up this coming year, that the fact may more fully be able to participate and exercise the role and responsibility it's been given in the code, to be able to review these collective bargaining agreements prior to execution and be able to have input and make recommendations. As part of Ed noting, us being more visible in this area in terms of how we would advise and recommend the administration, the city, to at least be aware of and, pursue certain areas of importance in terms of what potentially is workable and not workable in this particular area of concern. Just my thoughts.
Thank you, Bob. Jody?
I wanted to add on to some of the other things that were being said. And I know I said you can't keep up with 5% steps and 3% COLAs. You can if you want to increase the tax rate. And then the question is to that is how much increased tax rate can the population bear? And that's the question that I hope that the spending affordability review will answer. What is the capacity of the residents to fund increases? And that varies a lot. I mean, if you have a wealthy population, that's one thing, but as your population shifts and change, how much can they afford to pay? How much is their income increasing? Is it becoming more of a retiree population that has a set income, that kind of thing? Those, if that's where our resident population is going and the people that are paying our taxes in, how much can they bear in taxes? And that's a critical question. And I think that will play a really good role in helping us know how much we can afford.
Okay, thank you, Jody. Ross, and then we'll cut it off.
Yeah, so that's why we want to do the survey. I think we really do need to take it to the citizens to ask them what they want, but also what they're willing to pay for. And that means that's going to have to be a very good, well-designed survey. It's also going to have, we're going to have to take efforts to make sure we get to all populations. It could be that we could do charrettes. I did this with my ward, where we have a list of areas and we give people little dots to vote. And I actually came up with surprising outcome the last time I did this, because the number one issue in my ward was our relationship with the housing authority. I thought it was going to be gunshots. That was way down. So but I think we have to figure out a way to empower the people that we're asking to pay for all of this stuff. And that's why we're putting in the budget this notion of a survey. It may work, it may not, but we think we need to try.
All right. Thank you, Ross. A very good, healthy discussion. Jody, I really appreciate your explanation of the amendment process and the amendments that were in fact adopted, and it gives me a little bit more comfort that the process may not have been as broken as perhaps somebody may have thought just by reading the capital. So congratulations on a very, very positive budget process to all who were involved. Moving right along, Resilience Authority ordinance. At the last meeting, we had a good discussion about ordinance 014-21, and I expressed a number of concerns, as did some other members of the commission, and I was given direction to prepare a letter to the mayor and city council incorporating the concerns that we had discussed. I did that and just circulated the letter to the draft letter to the members of the commission. Several of you provided me with comments that were subsequently incorporated into the draft letter. And then with the meeting materials, I sent you out what I'll consider to be, the letter incorporating various comments and up for approval at today's meeting. I have not heard any additional comments or revisions requested to the letter. So I'm assuming that, perhaps incorrectly, that members of the commission are satisfied with the letter in its current form. So I'll open it up if anybody has any comments or questions. And if not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the letter in its current form as distributed, and I will have it sent out to the mayor and council. I see Jim Cardillo.
Thanks. This is just a note to Alderman Arnett and also to pass on to Alderwoman Finlayson with regards to the Finance Committee. I think when you present this document, please indicate that not only did the FAC identify problematic areas in the legislation, but there is a recommendation for each problematic area as to how to cure. So it wasn't simply just saying this is bad, this is bad. I think you need to understand that we are also identifying areas where how we would like to see the legislation revised. So that's all I want to pass on. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Other comments, questions from FAC members? Seeing and hearing not. Did I hear somebody chime in? No, seeing or hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve and authorize the distribution of the letter to the mayor and council regarding ordinance 014-21 as distributed with today's meeting materials.
So moved.
Moved by Jim Cardillo, seconded by Bob Burden. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? No. Let the record reflect that the vote was unanimous by raise of hands. And thank you all very, very much. I think it was a good, healthy process and good comment for discussion. Jackie.
Would you please copy me and David Gerald on that letter as well?
Yes, I believe that, let me see.
It was attached to the invite. It was attached to one of the meeting invites.
Yeah, it was attached. Anyway, David has it. And I see that at least in the CCs of the letter, David is a CC. Kim, I'm going to be sending this to you momentarily. I've already have it all PDF'd and set up. And I'd ask you to also forwarded to Jackie, even though she's not shown on this as a CC.
Affirmative.
Thank you.
Okay. Ross?
Thank you. Jackie, I feel some urgency, and I know Alderman Savage does as well. I've been hearing that there's not a great deal of flexibility with this legislation, and I have a lot of the concerns that are raised here, but I think we might be letting an illusion go on. I almost feel like it's a take it or leave it deal at this point, but I wanted to sit down with Alderman Savage. I can't remember. I know this is going to environmental matters. It might be going to rules, but I think we need to have a sit down to figure out if we even have any flexibility. I understand that the county council they only wanted to give us one representative, and then they finally allowed us to have three, and they feel that it should be very much controlled at the county level, which I think is concerning. So we really do need to get on this if we're expecting to pass this any time soon.
Yeah, so we have 120 days, the city does, to pass it. 120 days from the county's passage. Now, the county had told us all along that their process would take a lot longer than ours. We thought we would have more time to track amendments back and forth between the city and the county and try to get in line with one another before a vote was taken by either jurisdiction. But they moved very quickly with this legislation and passed it on Monday night, this past Monday night. Now, what I was working with before passage was
I said to be quiet when it was on the call.
What I was working with the county director of environmental policy and their office of law and our office of law before their vote Monday was to some of our concerns and whether they would be considered just technical amendments or non-substantive amendments, which are fine as long as they're non-substantive. We can have other amendments, and the two pieces of legislation can be considered substantively similar enough that they don't null and void each other out. So some things like, there was one area concerning the election of the chair of the Resilience Authority where the mayor did not require the concurrence of the mayor. Every other section requires the concurrence of the mayor when the county executive makes a decision, except for the removal of the Resilience Authority director. That's another one. So I pointed that out, that was not consistent, and it seemed to be more of a technical amendment, a drafting oversight. Their office of law agreed to that, but they did not add it in their legislation, but they wouldn't be opposing it. But then I heard later that they're sort of on the fence again about that one and whether or not it's a technical amendment. Another change that David Gerald and I suggested was to add my position to the non-voting advisors, because there's the directors of planning and zoning and public works and emergency management from both the city and the county. The city created the deputy city manager for resilience and sustainability position, and we thought it would rather odd if that position was not included as a non-voting advisory position. The county doesn't have a, just one moment, I'm sorry. I apologize, there's construction in my home right now and I'm working from home today. So the county doesn't have the same sort of position. They have a director of environmental policy. We both envisioned that we would be in meetings, but we thought it would make sense, since we have a position in the city, to include that. The county's office of law did not find that to be a substantive amendment, so they're okay with that. But as you're saying, Ross, this illusion, I agree with you in some respects, because they've passed the legislation. So any amendment that the city does now cannot be considered substantive in order for us to have similar legislation. But there is a work session. You guys probably know this. On June 24th, the city council is having a work session on this ordinance.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm beginning to feel like I'm a cranky old man, but right now, I don't really like this. I think there's just too many problems, but I think Maybe that's because I don't know enough about it and all the work you've done, you and David and Jody and everybody. But I certainly do agree you should be there. Of all people, you really should be there. I mean, that's just incredible oversight.
Okay, well, Jackie, thank you very much for speaking up.
You're welcome.
I just sent the final letter to Kim, and in my transmittal to her, I said, please make sure to copy Jackie on this. So,
And if you have questions or want me to appear, before you, I'm happy to help in any way I can.
okay, great. Thank you very much. Bob?
This sounds like a take it or leave it proposition, quite frankly, what you presented, Jackie, from the county's perspective. And that's very disappointing. I think the city council nonetheless needs to go through the exercise. They need to make the necessary amendments that they feel would be appropriate so that the city feels comfortable, such that it's a matter of record, regardless of whether the amendments are substantive or not. If substantive amendments need to be made, the city council should make them. We need to have a record of what's taken place here. But I tell you, Ross, I share your concern here. I just, if this is a take it or leave it thing, I'm very disappointed that the county has taken that position. I mean, this was initiated, I thought, by the city and reaching out to the county, and this was to be a partnership type effort to look at how we can address critical issues in both the city and the county, that deal with climate change and other issues that impact both of our economies and our citizens and our businesses. And it seems like the county now is taking a position that, hey, we're the
We're
just
the
a take it or
800-pound
leave it
gorilla.
position. It just doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound
Yeah,
good at all.
to address some of your concerns,
I wouldn't walk
I
away
do
from
think there's,
this. I wouldn't walk away from this. I'd run away from it the way it's being presented right now, to tell you the
well,
truth.
it's not quite as dire as, it may have sounded. So let me just say this. If the city has some substantive, what could be considered substantive amendments, the county could amend their legislation still. We can still work, the staff can work back and forth with the county staff to have the county amend their legislation to be more consistent with ours. So I don't think, Bob, that it's a take it or leave it. I still think there's some room. There's 120 days for us to pass similar legislation in between. They could amend, or they could repeal and reintroduce, but I think it would be simpler for the county to amend their legislation. What we're doing, the staff is doing, is we're tracking the amendments that the county's made and what the city is going to propose, and discussing, the offices of law will discuss whether it's a technical amendment or substantive amendment, and then bring it back to the county council and see if they will amend their legislation to be similar with our legislation.
Ross?
If there was ever a time to have a joint meeting of the city and the county councils, this seems to me to be the time to do that. I don't understand why we don't work with each other. It's like we're on different planets. We don't really work particularly much with the administration either, but some of the things that I'm hearing are very antagonistic sounding towards the city, and I'm not even sure it's coming from the county council. I think it might be coming from other sources, and it feels to me a lot like the city really can't be trusted to do its own business. And we better get that cleared up pretty quickly, because not a good way to go into a partnership.
Okay, thank you all very much for the comments, and we'll see where it goes. I did get notice of the June 24th work session. Is that a work session in which I am requested to attend or do anything at, or was I just copied on it, for information? If anybody knows.
I don't know, but I know that the county environmental policy director will be there, and perhaps their attorney as well.
Well,
I would appreciate it if you could be there, Fred. I think
is this a virtual or live?
it's live.
Live at the council chambers?
Yes.
Okay, I'll see what I can do. Yeah, I already tentatively put it on my calendar for that afternoon, so we'll see. Okay.
Oh, Fred, let me just add one more thing. The county's approach is like, for anything else they think that they need to amend, they can do that later, including the articles of incorporation. And in fact, the legislation says that they can amend and submit to the state any changes, any amendments to the articles of incorporation. Some of their the county council members brought up, do we need to have qualifications enumerated? They thought that maybe the county council should be allowed to appoint the members. Those amendments did not pass, but those kinds of concerns, they said, could be dealt with by later amendments.
Okay. Yeah, they certainly could. You identified a couple different ways they could do it, either by repealing this ordinance and enacting entirely new ordinance, by amending this ordinance, et cetera, et cetera. So let's see what happens after the 24th. Okay, last on the agenda, is there anything more on pension and retirement benefits? I think, Frank, or not Frank, Ed, you were somebody who was going to be looking at or exploring what existing information or data. Is there anything new on that?
But this is Ed. I don't know that I've seen anything new unless I've somehow missed that.
Yeah. Okay. Jody.
Did I not? And this is, I've been very busy, but I thought I sent to the FAC, or I sent to you, Chairman, that 2 documents that had lists of other pension plans from surrounding jurisdictions and their terms.
No, I don't recall receiving that.
Okay, I'll have to go back and look. I pulled it. I thought I pulled it together. I do have 2 different documents. One from from our pension consultant that does our pension studies, our actuary. He had some data he could share, and then our HR director had a document. She can share it. It came from another source, and she had to give me permission to relay it to you. But at some point in time, I did get permission from both parties to do it, and I thought I had sent out an email for to send it to you, but perhaps I didn't.
Yeah. Okay. No problem. If you could just,
they're pretty comprehensive, and I don't know if any of these jurisdictions have changed their pension terms since then.
Okay, if you could just send that out to all the commission members, I'd appreciate it. And to Alderman Arnett. Okay, anybody else have anything for the good of the order today? If not, good, healthy discussion. I hope you all are well. Entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion made by Bob Burden, seconded by Jim Cardillo. No discussion on the motion. All in favor of adjourning, signify by raising your hand and saying aye. Opposed? All right, we are adjourned. Everybody be healthy and safe, and have a good week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Coming.
Thank you.